we're going to talk about circles. And circles are defined as the set of all points equidistant from a point called the center. So, circle is a set of all points equidistant from a point called the center. This equidistant just means that they are all the same distance. So if I have a point called the center, then the set of all points that are the same distance around it is called a circle. And that center point is called the center. Now this is only for a plane, so 2 dimensions only. We're not talking about 3 dimensions. If we were in 3 dimensions, that would be the definition of a sphere. So let's take a look at a circle. And so if I have a circle, and I have my center point, then a line segment connecting the center to the circle is called the radius. And the length of that line segment is also called the radius. Now, if I have a line segment that goes from one piece of the circle to another piece of the circle through the center, that is called the diameter. And the length of that line segment is also called the diameter. So you know, when I connect any 2 points on a circle, so this point to this point, that is called a chord. A chord. And if I have a piece of the circle, so let's say I have this piece from there to there, that is called an arc. And I believe that's all we really need to know. We've got the circle, we've got the center. I didn't label the center, but we'll do that right now. That is the center. And then we have the circle, which I also didn't label, but we can label it right now. This is the circle. And then we have the radius, which goes from the center to the circle. The diameter, which goes across the circle through the center. And then a chord, which just connects any 2 pieces of the circle. And an arc, which is a piece of the circle. And then this diameter actually is also the longest chord possible. And the radius is the same all the way around. That is the distance from the center to the circle. Now, I do want to point out a couple things. If we have our circle, the circle is just that ring. It actually is technically not this inside part. So this inside part here is technically not part of the circle. That is inside the circle. So when somebody says, what's the area of a circle? Technically it's 0 because that ring has 0 area. What they mean is, what is the area enclosed by the circle? So we have our circle, and if I am ever given, for example, that the diameter is, let's say, 12 inches, then I know that the radius is half of that, because the radius is half of the diameter in length. And similarly, if I am given a circle and somebody gives me the radius, let's say the radius is equal to 5 meters, then the diameter is twice that. And that's about all we need to know. We need to know how to find the radius, how to find the diameter, and how to find the circumference of a circle now. So if I want to find the circumference of a circle, I use the formula C equals 2 pi r. Now, some people may also tell you that you could use the formula C equals pi times the diameter. And you'll see later when we're doing area why I personally prefer this formula so much better, because it's really related a lot closer to the area than the other formula. But either one works. So 2 pi r. So if I have a circle, let's make it blue this time. If I have a circle and its radius is, we'll leave units off this time. Let's say this unit is 5. The radius is 5, and so circumference equals 2 times pi times 5, which equals 10 pi. Now that's called the exact answer. And then if I want an approximate answer, I can either pick up my calculator and do 10 times pi on my calculator and equals, or I can do it by hand and do 10 times 3.14, or I can do 10 times 22 sevenths, because 3.14 and 22 sevenths are approximations of pi. Those are not equal to pi, those are approximations of pi. So I can either use the calculator and get an approximation that's a lot more accurate than those two, or I can do it by hand using 3.14 or 22 sevenths as pi, or I can do it by saying 10 pi, which is the exact answer. So of the 4 possible answers, calculator, multiplying it by hand by the decimal approximation, 3.14, multiplying it by hand by the fraction approximation, 22 sevenths, or multiplying it with a calculator by the approximation for pi on the calculator, or the exact answer, 10 pi. Those are the 4 possible ones. The only one that is exact is 10 pi, because as soon as I use a calculator for pi, or approximate it with 3.14, or approximate it with 22 sevenths, I'm getting an approximate answer. So that's how you find the area or the circumference of a circle with the radius. Now, if I have the circumference of a circle for something where I have a diameter, let's say diameter 7, I can still use that same formula, C equals 2 pi r. Now remember that r is equal to half the diameter. So what I can do is say this is equal to 2 pi, and half of the diameter is 7 halves. Cancel those out, and I get 7 pi. Now, this is a case where it'd be easier to use the pi times diameter, but again, later on you'll see if you're going to memorize one formula, this is the one to memorize because it goes with the area quite nicely. So the circumference is 7 pi, or we could approximate it and say 7 times pi on the calculator, or we could approximate it and say 7 times 3.14, Or we could approximate it and say 7 times 22/7. And that's the circumference of a circle using the diameter. Let's find the radius of a circle given the circumference. Well, if I have a circle and I tell you that the circumference is equal, let's say, 22, and I want to know the radius, what can I do? Well, I know C equals 2 pi r. And it's good to write that formula down every single time. Now I fill in what I know. Well, I know that circumference is 22. I know the number 2 is 2. I know pi is pi. And I know that I want to find out the radius, so I leave r as r. So now I can divide both sides by 2 pi. And that cancels that out. Leaves me with r on this side. And then I could just do this in my calculator, but I do see something I can simplify here right now. This is 11 over pi. So I could leave it like that as an exact answer, because that is as simplified as it gets. Or I could enter it in a calculator and get an approximate answer. Either way works, but that's how you can find the radius if you're just given the circumference. And then to find the diameter, we just multiply that by 2. But that's how we find the radius. That's how we find the radius. Let's look at another example. What if I had not a circle, but a semicircle? Semicircle is just half of a circle. So what if I had half of a circle? And I know I erased a little bit too much up there, but that's okay. We can fill it back in here. What if I wanted to find the area of the circumference of that? Well, let's say this has a radius of 10. Well, this circumference of this part is going to be half of the circumference of the whole circle. I hope that makes sense, because it's half of the circle, it's going to be half of the circumference. So if I know C equals 2 pi r, then that means that the circumference is 2 times pi times 10, or 20 pi. So now I can take half of that and get that C over 2 is equal to 10 pi. Because I want half of the circumference. But that is not the whole thing. We have that, plus we need to include this length here. Well, that's 10, and then there's another 10 here for the other radius. So this is 20. So the perimeter, because it's no longer circumference, because it's no longer circle, is 10 pi for the semicircle part, and then 20 for the radius or diameter part. We have to include that, because if I am taking a, so to speak, walk around there, and I want to find all the way, I have to go all the way around my semicircle, and if I stop there, I haven't made it home. How do I get back home? I have to go another 10 and then another 10 to get all the way around. So that's how we get 10 pi for the semicircle and then 20 for the straight parts. And we cannot combine those, because those are not like terms in a way, because 10 pi does not combine with 20. We can't combine those at all, because the pi is causing us to not be able to combine them. We could get an approximate answer on a calculator by doing 10 times pi plus 20, or using 3.14, or using 22/7, and then we could combine them. But otherwise we can't combine, and this is the best answer we can give, is just perimeter is equal to 10 pi plus 20. And keep in mind, we called it perimeter because it's no longer just the circumference. We can call it half of the circumference here because that's all circle parts. But as soon as we add in straight parts, we have to call it perimeter. So the perimeter of that semicircle is the semicircle plus the straight parts. We have to have that in there. And that's it for our circles and circles and perimeter video, circles and circumference. Thank you very much.